just look closely at this video. Behind the booths, you can see a car launching into the air. 2 people were killed in this incident. You can just see it flying there. This all happened on the American side of the Rainbow Bridge border crossing between New York and Ontario. And the CBC's Hillary Johnson has been following this story for us all afternoon, and she joins us now. So Hillary, walk us through what is the latest on this explosion?
Well, David, it was certainly a busy day for security officials on both sides of the border. We know that this reached the highest levels of government in both countries, with, of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking about it briefly during question period before he excused himself to be briefed further. We know that U.S. President Joe Biden was also briefed on it. But here's a little bit of what we know. We know that around 1 p.m. Eastern time, so local time, that there was an incident. The FBI field office in Buffalo, New York, came out with a statement saying that they were investigating a vehicle explosion. Of course, that set a whole chain of events into motion. A lot of statements coming out from both sides of the border. But we did hear from sources on this side of the border that when this was first reported to the Canadian government, that it was operating on the assumption that this might be intentional, possibly even terrorism. Didn't mean it was terrorism, but because this happened at critical infrastructure or involving critical infrastructure, that was the assumption at first. Of course, we have now heard from New York's governor, Kathy Hochul, that it is not believed that this was a terrorist incident. So here's a little bit more of what we heard from the governor just a short while ago.
It's so important for me to stand here and tell the world, based on what we know at this moment, and again, anything can change, there is no sign of terrorist activity with respect to this crash.
But we do know that 2 people are dead. In terms of what happened exactly, why it happened, that's still something that we don't know. And certainly what officials have been telling us is that because that vehicle is so badly burned, that it could take a while to learn more. We do know, of course, just a short while ago on your show, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc saying that he was in touch all day with his U.S. counterpart, the head of U.S. Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. We also know that the Transport Minister was in touch with his counterpart, the Transport Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. So a lot of back and forth between security officials and government officials throughout the day, David.
Okay, Hillary, just before we go on with the conversation, I want to play that video again if we can, because I want people to look at this. Look right at the top of your screen in the background. See that white car? It just goes flying. So it's got to look right at the very top. Boom, there it goes. So you can see it's going at an enormous rate of speed. It's not going through the actual border stop. It's a street that appears to be adjacent to it. And Hillary, we know, I saw some video earlier from a witness who saw some of this and kind of described exactly what we're seeing now in that particular image. So what are we hearing from these witnesses?
A car through the air. That was exactly what we heard from that witness, a vehicle flying through the air. And some of the other things that we heard included a fireball, that there was a lot of fire after all of this happened, which of course would explain why we started to hear from the FBI, for example, that they were investigating a vehicle explosion. We are on the cusp of the U.S. Thanksgiving weekend. You can just imagine some of the travel plans that have possibly been disrupted, that cross-border activity as well that has now been disrupted. When is that border point going to reopen? That we don't know. We do know that 3 of those other international crossings in that Buffalo, Niagara area have now reopened. But some of those eyewitnesses, like you're saying, David, describing quite a scene. Here's a little bit of what we heard from one Canadian resident who is on the American side in Niagara Falls, and he told us what he saw.
So we were walking up the road and we seen this car coming down towards the border, and he was flying over 100 miles an hour. There was a car in front of him. He swerved out, went in front of the car, hit the fence, went flying up into the air. He hit, I think there was an elevation part. He went up into the air, and we just seen the fireball, and that's all we could see. It was just covered in smoke everywhere.
So the car was coming from the U.S. into Canada, towards Canada?
Yes, it was going towards Canada, yes. Looked like it hit part of the fence because it's all damaged, and then it went elevated up, and then it went up into the air, and then it was just a fireball and smoke everywhere. I've never seen anything like this. It was just incredible. The fire was so high up in the air.
So, David, you heard him talk about that fireball. You also heard him talk about how what he saw was his vehicle traveling from the U.S., on the U.S. side, sort of towards Canada. And certainly what we have heard from Canadian government sources now is that they are highly confident that All of this took place on the U.S. side of the border. The incident itself, that the vehicle originated on the U.S. side of the border. Still a lot of questions, of course. Who was involved? Why? Why did this happen? But for now, of course, a very busy day for security officials.
And the important thing to leave people with, the message from the governor of New York that there are no indications of terrorism after the early reports that it might be that. All right,
point.
Hillary, thank you so much. That's
Thank
the
you.
CBC's Hillary Johnstone.